Welcome back to the CivilNet podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Elliott. I'm delighted to be joined today by Larisa Hovannisian, who is the founder and head honcho at Teach For Armenia. I'm actually really excited about this because education reform has been something that's it's so critical in this country. And so I want to give you the floor here. I want to first understand what kind of partnership do you guys have with the government's ongoing education reforms? I want to start there and understand, are they consulting the private sector? Are you guys working together? What does the landscape look like in Armenia at this stage?
Part of our overall approach always has been to work with the government because our first program that we started the organization with is a teacher leadership program through which we recruit young university grads who are not necessarily teachers to go work for a period of 2 years in an underserved public school. We placed teachers from day one into the public school system. These were not volunteers. These were not people who were doing nice things once in a while, but these were folks who were like literally getting hired directly into the public school system. And so from day one, we partnered with the Ministry of Education. Back then it was Armen Ashotyan's ministry. And then there were a couple of other ministers that came and went. And currently we're working with Jean Andreasyan. And, people have criticized us before. The administration changed for working with the former government. We get criticized today for working with the current government.
How dare you try to educate children regardless of who's in charge?
I know. And, it's funny because clearly folks don't understand what it takes to do system reform and system change and work in partnership with the government to actually enable change to happen. Whatever. People, I guess, will always criticize us for that. But, we created Teach For Armenia and the teacher leadership program and subsequently all these other programs that are now part of our foundation to enable system reform and change in the education sector here. So we will always work very closely with the government. In response to your other question about the priorities that are ongoing right now, so the Ministry of Education recently created Armenia's first education strategy. So for all these years after the fall of the Soviet Union, we haven't actually had a document. We've had content, curriculum, objectives, national standards, etc. But we actually haven't had a strategy that the Ministry of Education had put out. And so, it's a really good first step. There's some things that need to be rethought, revised.
The strategy itself?
Yeah, amended as you kind of go through it.
Overall, how would you assess the quality of the, because this is, I'm sorry to cut you off, but it's a common criticism, right? Is that a lot of these reform ideas and so on, they're kind of half-baked, they're not really well thought out, the impact. Let's just look at the way that they handled the public transport reform in Yerevan, right? I know it's municipal level, but there's this idea that things are not well thought out. How do you feel the document kind of...
Yeah, I think, first of all, I think it's a great first step. It's really nice to have something solid. I think you're right. Usually folks kind of, not just this ministry, but in general, I think we're not really good at strategy writing because usually it's a grandiose idea, like a big vision that's written on paper. And then the backwards planning of it and seeing the whole system as a chain and thinking through every single step in order to get to that big vision is something that we need to get better at.
Because of lack of education, ironically enough.
We just haven't done it before. It's very new to us, right? And so I think the private sector can play, including nonprofits, can play a really important role here. The way that we run Teach For Armenia, it's very corporate. We have KPIs, we have, we measure our impact, we do audits. This is a serious operation. And I think we're more agile, we're less bureaucratic, obviously, and so I think we have just more flexibility to test and experiment and to build good standards and then work in partnership with the ministry to hopefully integrate some of that learning into their process. And thankfully, with this Ministry of Education, I've seen openness to that kind of thing. Of course, it's not immediate. It's still a bureaucracy and there's still a lot of things that you need to take into consideration. So people who are sort of looking for a quick turnaround or an immediate next step, I think, again, don't really understand what it takes to move things in a system like this one. And in general, in governments, I think, all across the world. So, yeah, I mean, there's still a lot to do, but I think we have an understanding of what we need to be doing. And I think it's also creating an opportunity for different nonprofits to partner together to see how we can increase our efficiencies, stop the redundancies, and there's a lot of that happening in the sector. You know, everyone has an AI program, everyone has a, you know, like a food program, everyone has a something else program. And so like the question is, how can we work together to make sure that we're aligning our efforts, but also maximizing dollars and AMDs and rubles and whatever invested, and are getting, you know, the best kind of impact out of all of that.
One thing that I feel is really lacking and really, really important, especially if we want to be a high-tech country, if we want to be a trade center, right? It's the emphasis on English language education. How do you see the emphasis being put on English as a second language in Armenia, especially in the regions? From what we do see that the English proficiency is going up in general, even compared to 5 years ago. Like now in Yerevan, you'll be served in English everywhere, whereas just a couple of years ago that wasn't the case. But outside of Yerevan, it's obviously a little bit different. Do you see any understanding in the government that this is actually important and we can't just rely on having Russian as a second language?
I mean, what I see is that it's not like our Russian proficiency is great either. I think just historically, like, we're more exposed to Russian because of cartoons and films and stuff like that. But I worry that not only are we not putting enough priority and emphasis on English, but we're also potentially in the process of losing another, you know, strategic language for us, which is, you know, we are located in a very specific area in the world. And so I think the more languages Armenians know and Armenian kids grow up with, like, the better. One of the best ways to learn a language is to not dub every single film into a different language or into Russian or into Armenian, you know. So there are some very simple things that could be done without even needing to make a massive investment right now into English teaching or foreign language teaching, Russian teaching in our schools, just purely through things like cartoons, films, again, entertainment that's on TV. But I think, of course, like if we were to think about this very seriously, I think a much larger investment should be done in this whole, you know, aspect of our education. Unfortunately, languages and the arts and music, those are the first things to kind of get nixed out of a budget if you have a problem with resources. You know, we have major teacher shortages. Most of the teacher shortages are in foreign languages and primarily in STEM. And so, you know, I know you have a lot of people on your podcast talking about the future of tech and all these other things. And I think those are all really great things to talk about. And I absolutely think that should be our direction and strategy. But if we're not actually making the right investments right now, we're not going to be able to meet those demands and actually achieve that vision. So it all starts with school, and it starts with enabling access to good, solid education that's innovative and creative and actually giving kids what they need to thrive in a really difficult, complex, and changing environment, both in Armenia and globally.
Yeah, this is one of the biggest kind of looked over issues about living in Armenia, right? Especially as somebody who's Western educated, you know, diasporans are constantly texting me or emailing me or reaching out and going, why don't they, meaning the government, right? Why don't they do X thing, right? And to us, it's so logical, but it's like, they're not educated to think like that. This is the God's honest truth. It's one of the biggest issues in this country. It's just the sheer lack of education. One Western ambassador, I won't say which country, said that it quickly dawned on him living here that 1 year of that 4 years of university education in Armenia is equivalent to 1 year in Europe. That we're undereducated, and we cannot match the vision that we have as being a high tech, you know, let's say mercantilist, you know, like a trade hub country, if we don't have the education to, heck, we can't even be a country that can defend itself and think strategically if we're not taught how to think instead of being taught what to think. Are you seeing this? I mean, you mentioned there's a lack of teachers, and one of the big things about the ongoing reforms, right, is that they're reassessing teachers, and if they pass certain levels, they can actually earn more, and certain, like something like 48% of teachers are actually able to even pass that level, right? So it tells you just how terrible the teachers we even have are. What do you think of this approach? Do you think this is adequate? Do you think this is a good strategy, a good way to reform education?
Again, I think it's a good step. Like, there's a couple of things here. The attestation process that you're referring to, I think, is a good step. I think, again, it needs to be more all-encompassing. It's just testing for subject knowledge right now. But being a teacher is more than that. Like, we have to look for values and all these other things to make sure that we're truly recruiting the best people into the profession. I think it's great that people now have an opportunity to earn a lot more money if they pass the attestation. When I started Teach For Armenia, Armen Ashotyan told me, why do you want to bring more people into the system? We already have a surplus of teachers, and it's true. So we had a surplus of teachers over 10 years ago, and we still have a surplus of teachers, but we also have a crazy shortage of teachers. So basically what's happening is a lot of folks are choosing not to teach. So they have the degree, they have the diploma, and they're just choosing not to teach because it's not an attractive profession. Moving to a village is not something that usually people want to do. And so I think there's a question of supply and demand, obviously. And yes, the teacher attestation and some of these other things are really good steps toward hopefully filling these shortages. But I don't necessarily know if there's a direct link between people getting these, attestations and actually filling shortages across the country. And then the second thing I would say is, once you do fill the shortage, there's a big question around quality. And again, just knowing your subject is not nearly enough. So, we're hoping to work with the government to really figure out at a macro level, like, who is a great teacher and what do they need to be doing in classrooms in order for us to have change. The other thing that you said is actually really important. There's a good World Bank study that shows that kids in Armenia actually spend some of the least amount of time in class. So I think they're missing out on like 3 to 4 years of instructional time, which is humongous. So to your point, like, I think it's about 8 to 9 years of actual education instead of 12 years. And then once people get to university, what we're seeing is every year a declining rate for subject knowledge and tests. So for example, when we recruit directly from universities, we give folks a subject test to make sure that they know what they're going to be doing or that they can teach the subject in the school that we place them into. And every year, like, even the highest GPA folks, like, that testing score goes down every single year, which means that something happened like 10 to 15 years ago in universities, like the requirements changed. Maybe corruption was so rampant that things began literally affecting admission and all these other things, and so now we're dealing with the consequences of decisions that were made 10 to 15 years ago. And it's really sad because these kids, like these university graduates, they have so much potential. They're super smart. It's just they have not been exposed and given the right kind of education. I don't want to generalize because there are some faculties and some departments in these universities that continue to be very strong, but the overall picture is concerning, and I think we really need to think about what it's going to take for us to improve outcomes there.
We can look. This is controversial, but whatever. I'm happy to take the heat for it. But it's something that is absolutely noticeable in this country. Is that just the even our quote unquote experts. I won't name anybody, but whether it's geopolitical, whether it's military, whether it's even the solutions that are provided are just so. It just shows there's just a lack of worldly understanding of certain subjects. And so when you have diasporans who are like, but why doesn't Armenia do that? Why don't they do this? It's like they don't have that capacity right now. Right?
I think the problem here also is we're such a small country and we have so many constraints when it comes to talent that people get promoted a lot faster here into higher positions than they would anywhere else in the world where the market is just larger and there's more competition. So you see some super mediocre people who are climbing the ranks in companies or in organizations just purely because they have one additional thing that maybe sets them apart.
Like the best of limited options, basically.
Yeah, and I think it's really dangerous because we have, it's a bubble and eventually bubbles burst. And so you think what you're doing with that is you're decreasing the quality and the professionalism of our workforce in Armenia because, you have these mediocre folks doing and making important decisions or giving important advice. And if that's the best that your country has to offer, then that's truly, the best that I guess you have to deal with, which is not necessarily the best. So anyway, but as an employer, I understand some of that because you literally need someone in a position. You can't do everything yourself, but then it's really hard to find the right person. And recently we've been thinking together as a team that maybe it's just better to have us, to just do things on your own more so that, at least the team members that you have are actually great, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. It's just it's kind of tragic. I think our self-imposed isolation over 3 decades was also, up until fairly recently, the only place the majority of Armenians had traveled outside of Armenia, those were able to, was Batumi and back. They haven't seen the world. So the fact that we're kind of emerging now on the world scene, we're getting more tourists, we're getting more foreigners, we're getting more expats. Our expat community is growing, not just Russians. And the fact that, IT is really interesting too. I have friends who are in their young 20s, and they're just traveling. I see them all over the world all the time. The fact we have Wizz Air now, I think that's going to really make a big shift. I think that's a really, a big positive. And the impact of technology. I spoke to somebody who is working with the education ministry. I asked about you, by the way. They do cooperate with you guys. And she was saying that one of their solutions now is actually doing... they can't fill in roles for teachers in the region. So now they're doing digital classes, right, through Zoom. And they are doing English, French, German language lessons and so on. So I think that's a really cool initiative that technology is filling up the space rather than having to find someone who's willing to go, be in in Jil village or something on the border. You can actually do that through technology. How do you see technology taking a role in the evolution of the education system in Armenia?
It's an enabler. It's not the solution. I think we still need great teachers. And I was actually reading this World Economic Forum report that has a prediction for the next 10 to 15 years, what roles are going to stay, what roles are going to become even sometimes more important. And it was really interesting to see that educators and, folks who know how to cultivate values and soft skills and stuff like that, those are the people that are actually going to still be, if not more important than they were before. But the role of the teacher, the role of the school is going to have to completely change. I think we are still in denial about that. We're cosmetically trying to improve things within a system that I think ultimately doesn't work anymore. And at some point, I thought it was going to happen way earlier because of the technology boom. But now with AI, I'm looking at some of these educators, not in Armenia, but just all over the world. It's the same thing. People are just we're just going to continue pushing this wet noodle across the table and just expect for it to have different outcomes. I think we just need to fundamentally reimagine what education is supposed to do for our kids, what schools are supposed to be like, who teachers need to be and what kind of people they need to be and what they need to be doing in classrooms. So I'm excited. I see technology and AI as such a equalizer in a way, and such a wonderful tool for educators to use to enable even better outcomes for kids. And I think, for kids that are maybe not neurotypical and have interesting learning differences or are completely innovative and creative and just don't fit into this super rote memorization kind of sit at your desk all day long system. I think technology will play a very important role in enabling their success. So I'm excited. It's just a matter of how do we think about these things? How do we prioritize all these different resources, what we actually fundamentally decide to value versus not value, and be bold and sort of courageous enough to say, you know what, like this worked for us for the last 100 years, and going into these next 100 years, we have to think about something completely different.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned AI. Like I was invited to give like a guest talk at a high school here in Yerevan last week, and it wasn't last week, it was Monday actually. Oh my God, where's the week gone?
It's okay.
So
you have a baby at home, so
couple days ago.
Yeah.
But and it was like the seniors, and just talking about entrepreneurship and self-ownership and that kind of stuff. And so at the end, the teacher gave like a little homework assignment based on what I said. And then she says, like we're talking, and she said, one second, while they're all working. And she goes, Erich, by the way, you can use ChatGPT like to help you. And one of the students answered, that's okay, we're going to use it anyway. Like, it's just kind of funny because for her, it's like an afterthought. And for them, they're like, it's the first thing we're going to do, Do you see, it's good what you said. It's kind of scary to me though, because do you see within the education industry any kind of forward thinking like that? Any kind of, hey, we really need to be future ready? Or are they still trying to, I don't know, patch up the dam that's leaking?
Listen, I think anyone who is working at the Ministry of Education, especially like, people who are managing teams and big national projects like this, it's tough because there's a lot of reform that needs to happen at different levels within the ministry, outside of the ministry, with the system itself. So kind of having insight into what that all looks like on the inside and for, I guess, every ministry in the government. The bureaucracy and all of that. It's not set up in a way for you to spur change and innovation. So
it was intentionally done that way.
Yeah, it was intentionally done that way.
Let's be honest.
So I'm always surprised when like all these things are coming out, and like, yes, like some of it can be rolled out better, some of it can be thought through better, but like just seeing the movement and the drive to make things better, I think is already very commendable. I can tell you, I don't think there's like in my experience, there's not like an overarching maybe understanding yet at the ministry, but I do think that there are a couple of really incredibly smart and innovative people who understand that like this is the time for us to think creatively and create, new solutions. So, like at Teach For Armenia, one of the other projects we're working on right now is a school turnaround program called Serund. So we partner with public schools that are not doing too well, and within 2 years we turn them around and they have completely different outcomes, both academically and in terms of like culture and engagement.
You're like the Gordon Ramsay kitchen nightmares of the public public school system. I'm
like the Doge of no, I'm just kidding. But
you're Armenia's Elon, yeah.
And so that experience, we've been running this program for 5 years, it's been really incredible to see that if you give the right tools, even to educators and principals who've been in the system for 20, 30 years, and you don't just like train them once in a while in a nice hotel like in Yerevan and give them like a coffee break,
a certificate at the end or something,
but you actually like move there and you work with folks like every single day over the course of 2 years in this like really structured manner. People can be different. To your point of, I don't know if it's just an education issue. I think it's also like a modeling. Like, has there been exposure? Is it possible to conceptualize a completely different reality in Armenia that's facilitated by us? By local Armenians, because the other problem also is that the diaspora always thinks that we have all the answers and that these local Armenian people don't know anything, and that's truly not the case. I think there's a lot to learn all around, and if you kind of can let go of the ego and kind of put your condescending tone aside, that learning can be accelerated, and people can operate in a different way and just be better in general.
You do. I'm sorry. I just want to touch up on this. You do see centers of excellence in spite of the failure of the education system.
I see bright spots all across the country, and I think part of that is facilitated by the Ministry of Education. Part of that is facilitated by great nonprofits in Armenia. TFA aside, there's other really great organizations that are doing really important work in the public education sector. And so I think we've liberalized the system, and there's just more experimentation and more competition, which is really great.
Which is great,
yeah, and people like really trying to create the better product. And so what I started with telling you about this turnaround program, this whole project is called Serund. Right now, we've basically been encouraged by the Ministry of Education to conceptualize what would a new public school look like? Could we create a school that follows national curriculum but has a completely different approach to education in general? And so it's been, first of all, it's such an honor that we, along with others, can be kind of encouraged to think big and to propose solutions that we think could change the trajectory of Armenia, and especially of the future of our children. And so, it's probably hard to imagine that would have been the case 10 to 15 years ago. But I think it takes time. I think we've been on a journey, and some of it started 15 years ago. Or 10 years ago, and some of it is just starting to happen now. It's a cycle, and my hope is that whatever the political climate is in Armenia, that all of us can just agree that some of these things are very important for us to continue. Innovation in education and continuous investment in the education sector, and other sectors. I can speak mostly on the education sector. So that's the hope, and that's what I also think the role of the nonprofits could be, is to kind of anchor whatever priorities are important, and whoever is in the seat of power, we can collectively continue some of this work so that we're constantly not restarting things over and over again. Because if you restart every 4 to 8 years, you're never going to get ahead. And our neighbors are always going to win every single time, because we can't seem to agree on a few fundamental things.
Saakashvili did something interesting. Speaking of our neighbors, he basically invited foreigners, and it was modeled on Japan, actually. Mm-hmm. But he invited foreigners and just put them out in the regions to go and teach English. And that did result in an increase in the level of English. Does TFA see itself doing something like that, for example? Not just with English, but with education in general?
That's our model. We have people from the diaspora coming. Unfortunately, not that many. We have really tried, but the 2-year commitment seems difficult for most people. We prioritize different subjects in the school, and our teachers absolutely have to speak really great Armenian, because they're teaching in a public school, and the working language in our schools is Armenian, obviously. I think there was, I would like to, I don't know for sure if these kinds of things, like what Saakashvili did, I don't know if that was super impactful. I don't know if there's an impact report or whatever that one can read, but I think it was actually
it's just a difference in their English proficiency year on year. So there's been a noticeable increase in English proficiency in Georgia.
I didn't notice it that much the last time I was there, but yeah, either way, I think we need to get really serious about our foreign languages, going back to our earlier conversation. And I don't think it's just English. English is absolutely critical, but Russian is really important.
Sure.
Knowing the language of our friendly neighbors that are not Georgia, I think is really important.
Absolutely.
My Irish father always told me, you need to learn Turkish. I was like, why would I want to do that? And he's like, you have to know the language of the enemy. And anyway, so
that's why the Irish speak English, you see.
Exactly.
we were forced to learn it.
We were forced to learn it. So yeah, I think we're in a interesting geopolitical situation, obviously, and our kids don't have the choice but to be prepared for any kind of scenario. And I think the more knowledge, the more languages we know, the better our education system, the more chances we have of being really successful.
Yeah, for a small country, we can't. Listen, this is one thing that irks me as well. Is international events, you will have government, like ministers and deputy ministers. Deputy ministers, not so much anymore, but ministers who will give speeches in Armenian to a foreign audience. And I've had significant foreigners, important people, who have come to this country for these events that can go like, why did we sit through a 25-minute speech where we don't understand anything? Mm-hmm. And when you ask the government officials, well, it's Armenia, it's our official language. Great. You want to stay in isolated little backwater? Have at it. Keep giving your official speeches in Armenian. Tell foreigners they're not welcome here. But if you want to be a developed country, we need to be like the Dutch. Mm-hmm. The Dutch can sneeze and speak better English than probably most Americans, honestly. But they speak Dutch. Mm-hmm. Their language is there, but they speak perfect English. They also learn German and French. By the time my cousin in the Netherlands was 11, 12 years old, she was taking 4 language classes as part of the official curriculum. And again, we can say, well, that's them. They have recent... Our entire population is the size of a mid-sized North American city. I don't believe that these things are not achievable at scale.
And I think that's our advantage as a country. I was talking to someone a couple of days ago, and they said, when you apply to international funders, like they just always overlook Armenia because it's not an interesting geography to them. And I actually just wrote something on my LinkedIn about that too, and I agree. But I think if we can reposition our geography to investors and to people who are not Armenian, whether it's for, again, investment or it's for something else, I think we need to say that we're such a small country and we have, and our size is actually working to our advantage because we can test and experiment here a lot faster and come up with solutions than in many other places that can be ultimately scaled than if you're a larger country, right? So I see Armenia as like this lab, as this place where things can be, piloted, tested, experimented, learned from, accelerated. And when I think about the size of our country and the education system here, I mean, we have 1,400 schools in this country. That's like a sizable U.S. school district, one. So if we just stop overcomplicating things and just see it for what it is, which is one school district that needs better leadership, better resources, a really solid strategy, I think really incredible transformational things can happen really quickly. And I don't necessarily believe that everyone needs to get fired and everyone is horrible. I just think people need professional development. They need support. They need to be provided a chance to prove like what they know and who they are and what they can bring into the education system. We don't have the luxury of firing every single teacher in the education system because we don't have a pipeline now that's ready to replace people. Mm-hmm. Our average age of teachers is like 55, 56. Everyone's going to be going into retirement soon. What are we going to be doing then? I mean, we have these like micro and macro level issues that we need to be thinking about. And I think it's easy to kind of get stuck in the micro level stuff because you're just dealing with these issues day to day. My hope is that we can just continue thinking about like what's ahead in the next 10 to 15 years. And, some will say, well, with AI, it's really hard to predict what's going to happen in the next 10 to 15 years. But, you can at least...
You can never predict without AI, it's really difficult to predict anyways, right? You just try your best.
I think you just have like a big idea of where you want to be by a certain time. And then the way you get there should stay agile and flexible and open to experimentation. I mean, no one thought that USAID would ever be gutted or shut down or, put on pause. And so
has that impacted you guys, by the way?
Contrary to many people's beliefs, we've received no funding from the U.S. government.
Oh.
We've had like some side projects with other organizations that were partially funded by USAID, but our contract was not with USAID. And so, I was really angry for a decade because it's like, why are we not getting funded? And so
you dodged a bullet now.
Yeah, I mean, we would have, we actually applied to one big thing a couple of years ago and we didn't get it. And, we would have still been in process with that project if we were to get it back then. And, things would be really tough right now. There's a lot of organizations that are in a difficult position right now, given everything that's happened.
Yeah, you said something that was interesting to me. The majority of our teachers are actually about to retire, and I think that's another big misconception that Armenians abroad, like that's one thing that really shocked me, is that when I really started to understand just the scale of the neglect of this country for 30 years. Like, just people just don't understand, like, that the army, the education system, the healthcare, it was a shell of a state. Let's be honest. To me, Armenia is a young country. We're an ancient people, but Armenia is just a couple of years old. That's the truth. We're a toddler country. We're learning how to crawl now, right?
Yeah, we were in a state of inertia for many years. And, when I look at the teacher workforce, these people graduated 20, 30 years ago. And they moved to a village to teach, and then no one ever contacted them again. Can you imagine having any other job where you have no growth, no professional development opportunities, no incentives? Whatever you earned 20 years ago is exactly what the salary that you're earning right now, except for now everything is a lot more expensive. You have to be some saint to be able to keep being super motivated and incentivized to teach. And so I'm appreciative of the Ministry of Education because I think the motivation and the incentivization, along with the retesting of knowledge and of people's, ability to actually teach after such a long period of just not even being in touch. The workforce and the Ministry of Education, I think, is a really important step. It might not seem like the macro level reform we just need at this point. People might want bigger and more abrupt things, but knowing what being in it for the last 12 or more years, I think this is a really important step forward. And you can just see people being, they're in a different place. They're earning a livable wage, and to me, it's a national security issue. If you place a robot into a community that's on the border of Azerbaijan, okay, that's a nice short-term thing, maybe a Band-Aid solution. But if parents don't have teachers and doctors accessible for their kids in the community they live, they're going to leave at some point. You're a parent. I'm a parent.
Yeah.
You love your country. You're patriotic, but ultimately, your kids, I think for most people, come first. And so I think it's so important for us to figure out how to enable basic access to things like education and healthcare and all these other things so that people can also stay and feel good about the decision that they're making and not feel victimized by it, because it is a sacrifice right now to stay in these areas. It's dangerous, and again, basic things are not accessible.
Larisa, I like to finish these on a positive note. So tell me what's one thing that you're really optimistic about in the education reforms and education in Armenia in general.
When things get really tough for me or for our team, we just go to a school and we visit one of our classrooms and we see the kids, and everything makes sense. I know it sounds cheesy. People probably think I'm like a idealist. I am. I'm very grounded and pragmatic, though. Our kids are amazing. and they deserve all of our energy, all of our resources, and all of our support. When you are a funder and you're so upset by the political environment in Armenia, let's say, and you stop funding certain organizations or efforts that are happening for kids here in Armenia, the first people you're screwing over are our kids. And you're playing exactly into what Azerbaijan and other countries want to happen to us.
Russia, just say Russia. We know who you're talking about. Let's stop pretending they're our friend. But yes, I got you.
I have my take on Russia, especially as someone who's lived there for like my formative years. But so I think we have to think about the world in that way in general. I don't think we have friends. I think we have to be good with everyone. I think that we have to learn as much as we possibly can and be able to speak everyone's language. Yep. I think
the Israelis understood this. We haven't yet for some reason.
Yeah, I think we have to get really clear on who we are and what our ultimate values are, not the values that were shoved down our throats by different empires and different systems. I think we have to leave this thing that's also been forced down our throats of, you are the perpetual victim. I think you have to know your history really well and not feel like you're a victim of it, and essentially help kids feel strong and as future victors. There's a lot of psychology here. Yeah. I think a lot of the things that we prioritize, even in our curriculum, has to happen, but when it happens and what we teach when and how, I think is really important. And so I think if we make the right moves right now, and it's really, some of it is like really fundamental and needs to change. Some of it is like very small tweaks. I think if we as adults can get really clear on some of these things, our kids are going to thrive and they're going to be the most amazing generation that Armenia has ever seen. That's why I'm in this work. I think if I wasn't in this work and all of the catastrophes that have happened in our country, especially in the last 4 to 5 years, probably would have thrown me into a massive depression. But I think it's the silver lining is that it's an opportunity for us to really wake up and rethink things and enable our kids to live a more courageous, strong, and victorious life.
I love it. Larisa Hovannisian, thanks for joining us on CivilNet.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks again for watching.